Hello, and thank you so much for joining me today for this thought from the Bible. Now, one thing that I absolutely love about this book is how often God will take something that is completely ordinary and transform it into something that is completely extraordinary, especially in relation to characters that we find within the Bible. Take a young man called Saul, for example. He was handsome, the Bible tells us, and very tall, standing a head taller than anyone else around him. But as far as we know, at the point that he is introduced, that is the only remarkable thing about him. He is just an ordinary guy. And on one ordinary day, this young man Saul heads out from the home of his father, Kish, searching for some of his dad's donkeys who have managed to get themselves lost. He travels for a few days and he sees no sign of the animals. And he's about to turn and head for home when his servant suggests, well, while we're here, why don't we just go and see the man of God, Samuel, and ask him for help? So on they go, and instead of Samuel giving Saul and his servant directions to the donkeys, Samuel instead anoints this young man as the very first king of the nation of Israel. Now, right now, the Queen of England, my home country, is celebrating her Platinum Jubilee. She has been on the throne of England for 70 years. But lately, she's not been in the best of health. Can't really blame her, she's in her 90s. But her son, Prince Charles, has started to take on a few more of her duties. And the interesting thing that you see is that he knows exactly what to do. He knows how to present himself. He knows how to fulfill the requirements of the monarch of England because he was bred to that position. He knows one day that will be his role. He has been trained for it. It may be an extraordinary position, but to him it's kind of ordinary because every single day he's known that that is his future and he has been trained accordingly. That was not the case for this young man, Saul. It's easy to look at his situation and think, oh well, of course Saul was king. Of course he was picked, because we know the whole story and we've read through it so many times and it's just ingrained in us. Saul was king of Israel. But he wouldn't have thought like that. I doubt if even in his wildest imaginings and daydreams that he had ever even slightly conceived the concept that one day he would be a king. The nation of Israel didn't even have a king. They'd never had one up to this point in time. So why would he have ever expected that future? Why would he have considered that his ordinary life could ever change in such a dramatic way? Well, there are two things that I love about this little story. The first is found in 1 Samuel chapter 10 and verse 9, where we read that as Saul turned to leave Samuel, God changed Saul's heart. When God changes the ordinary into something extraordinary, he gives us what we need to do what he is asking us to do. See, Saul, he went from being a man who looked pretty good on the outside, we know, to one who followed after God on the inside. And I know he didn't get it all right. I know he made plenty of mistakes. I know the end of his life is really quite a sad story. But at this point in time, when a young man was told that he would suddenly have responsibility for an entire nation, God stepped in and changed his heart. Earlier in that same chapter, Samuel tells Saul that he will actually be changed into an entirely different person. And I think you'd need to be, right? For all that Saul had to accomplish as king. He had to unite the separate tribes of Israel who up until this point had kind of managed themselves. He had to lead his country in battle. He had to set up a kingship over a people who weren't used to being led in that way. He had some incredibly difficult tasks ahead of him, tasks that he was completely ill-equipped for, completely untrained for. He needed that new heart. He needed to be made into someone new. Because Saul would never see his old, ordinary life again. And that's the second thing. When we commit to following after God, we can say goodbye to ordinary. As Jesus himself said in John chapter 17, we are not of the world any more than he, Jesus, is of the world. Romans 12 tells us that we are called to not conform to the pattern of this world, but to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. And finally, Philippians chapter 3 tells us our citizenship is in heaven. It's no longer here on earth, in this ordinary world. This is not ordinary life anymore. It is something so much more exciting. And while we're still here living on this earth, you know, there may be days that kind of feel a little bit ordinary, right? Days where you have to do the shopping and go to work and sort out the house and all of those ordinary things that we need to do, things that feel routine. Things that aren't epic, that aren't these amazing stories of God's transformation in every moment. Days that don't involve us being declared as royalty. But even on those days, we are supposed to be different. We have hearts that have been renewed, and daily transforming of our minds means that we are not sucked into what the world says is normal. We can stand and live differently. We can live lives of love for God and for others in a way that is counter to the cultures that we find ourselves living in. We can live in eager expectation that God can turn our ordinary into his extraordinary in any day of our lives, in any moment of our lives. And he can give us every single thing that we need for that wild ride. Living a life that's not ordinary is not easy. Sometimes it can be incredibly difficult, but it is exciting, it is thrilling, and it is another reason to fully commit our hearts and our lives to God so that we can see his extraordinary start to operate in even the most ordinary of our days. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I hope that was an encouragement for you. I'll be back on Wednesday next week with another thought from the Bible, so I will see you then.